Well, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, wait, listen to this.
If you smell what the rock is cooking.
In honor of The Rock, we have that in here. So now I've got to figure out how to take this off the screen and how we need to go on the screen, which is the problem. So there we go. Okay. So what I have to do is at some point figure out how to make it both so that we can be there and the other one is there. But everyone, welcome to the second episode of the Lipp Men on the UFL. I am Jeff. That is Jake. How are you this week?
Oh, man, it's been a long week. A lot of research has gone into this, and I'm excited to talk some XFL conference, a little bit of UFL. I mean, we talked about it last week. We're just kind of becoming fans, and I'm starting to fall in love with this. I've never been a big spring league guy, but I think I'm going to be pretty engaged this year.
Good, and that's what we're hoping the audience is. I mean, if you are a veteran fan of the XFL and the USFL, please join along and feel free to help us out. But if you're new, you'll fit right in. We only have 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks on you of looking into it. And hopefully we'll continue to look into it a little bit deeper than you. But if not, who knows? You know, this is a journey, and this is supposed to be fun. It's a little father-son task. This week is a YouTube exclusive. Now, those of you who are watching on YouTube, you already are watching. Those of you who want to watch it on YouTube or want to watch us, but usually we're looking on Twitch or X or Facebook, you have to go to YouTube. That's Unpopular Review Sports. You can subscribe to the network, and you can subscribe to the show, of course. And for those of you who only want to listen, I did upload the podcast on the Garden of Doom feed, so you have to subscribe to the Garden of Doom. Got a pretty good listenership on the UFL show, but I don't think it's what the typical audience for Garden of Doom and Garden Views was looking for. But it's also going to go up at Hammerlock Hangover once as sort of a one-time preview, and then we'll see. We'll see about putting on a different feed. There's a few different options that I'm exploring, but the best way really is YouTube. Obviously, the YouTube videos stay there forever. So I've talked a lot right now. So we're both wearing our St. Louis Battlehawks. This was not planned. I knew that I got Jake one of the blue ones to match his pretty blue eyes that he did not get from me because I do not have pretty blue eyes. But I'm wearing the Battlehawks one because I thought maybe I got it and we would match, but this won't be every week. And the other is because the championship game is going to be in St. Louis. So it's going to be in the Battle Dome. There are some mixed feelings about that because it could be a home team as opposed to a neutral site. If a bunch of things go right for one particular team, and then the other opposing team would feel like they have a disadvantage. But on the other side, St. Louis sold the most tickets last year, and they've already been selling at the highest clip. Though you were informing me that there's another team on their heels, so why don't you pick it up from here?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some backlash. I heard some people saying, oh, I wish it was in Canton. Oh, should be a neutral site. Should be here, should be there. I mean, St. Louis has a rich football history. St. Louis, they have a great team, but, it's football. Anything can happen. So we can't be saying, oh, it's going to give an unfair home field advantage because we don't even know if they're going to get there. There's a long season ahead. And so I think when you're looking at it as St. Louis as the home, I think it's really a great option for the UFL. It's an indoor stadium, so there's no issues with weather. And like we mentioned, I mean, a very good fan base. They're loyal. They're already committed to the UFL. And as this is a growing and expanding league, I mean, that needs to be the priority. The fans need to be the priority. They're not going to have any longevity or sustained success without fans. I mean, this is going to be on ESPN. It's going to be on Fox, but it's not going to stay there if people don't watch. So let's get it in those arenas that are going to be filled up. Let's get it where the people are going to be. And as more fans grow, we can take this to other places. And as you mentioned, DC, I've heard, has done a great job when it comes to selling tickets. Greg Williams was on his podcast He's, of course, the defensive coordinator of the Washington or the DC Defenders. And he was saying that they basically sold out of all their tickets. You'll go on Ticketmaster and you'll see a whole lot of tickets available, but it's all resale stuff from people that are trying to make a profit. So there are people out there that are seeing the potential of this league, and there's interest out there. And some of these cities are showing it a little bit more than others. And St. Louis gets rewarded by showing that loyalty and interest by getting the championship game.
Yep, I'm actually for it because I was thinking about it and sort of the torn between it, whether you're going to give someone a home field advantage or not, potentially. But I think this is a new league for fans, and I agree with you that the city that has rewarded its team, historically and this year, you should reward those fans. Also, geographically, St. Louis is probably the biggest city that's sort of in the center of the country. I think it's a hub for at least one major airline, but it's probably pretty easy to get there if you were going to fly in from anywhere, or as easy as to get in as any major city. So, and certainly probably any of the UFL teams, where we're going to talk about the XFL today. There's a little bit of news in the league. The championship game, as you mentioned, this year it's on Fox, so that's big. Because I don't think regular season games are on Fox this year. I think it's ESPN and is the other network Fox? We talked about this last week, but I'm having a senior moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's predominantly going to be ESPN. They'll have a couple games on ESPN2. I believe they're all going to be on ESPN Plus if you're an ESPN Plus awesome subscriber. But they are going to have a couple games on Fox. I believe it's going to be more on Fox Sports. I did look at an article, and I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But if there's anybody that's interested, we can definitely fact check this and validate everything and put it out there in another episode and really do a breakdown of how you can watch and where it's going to all be.
Yeah, on the back of my shirt, it actually has the Battlehawks schedule. I don't know if it says what network it's on or not, but we can check that out at some point also. This was probably all but a formality, but the UFL did renew its deal with Under Armour. I mean, again, that was announced that they were going to get new merchandise through Under Armour, and the uniforms were going to be through Under Armour. So, of course, they would renew the deal. And merchandise is coming to retailers. So up until now, I didn't really know this. Maybe in some of the home cities, it was a little bit different. But you could only purchase UFL merchandise online on their website, or probably through bootlegs or whatnot. But they're going to have merchandise shipped to retailers, so your Dick's, your Models, et cetera, where, I'm sure Walmarts and Targets of the world as well will be getting stuff the end of this month. So if you're looking to buy some stuff and get in on the bottom, I have a shirt from every team. So, all right, so let me tell you a couple weird things about me. One, we alluded to this last week. I still can't get behind buying a DC Defenders shirt. DC's never done anything to me. I like DC. I like going to DC. I even like how the DC Defenders team looks. There's a chance that I'll try to go to a game. Hopefully, if the resale market, if the scalpers start losing money and prices go down, or if they release more blocks of tickets, which both are possible. But I just haven't been able to do it yet. The other thing is, I bought an Arlington Renegade shirt. And they have a pretty cool logo. Is that the one I got? No. I got one with some stupid cartoon horse on it that maybe is the mascot, but it looks more like a mule. And it looks like something that for like a little kid shirt. And that's the one I wore yesterday. So my Arlington Renegade shirt for the team that's supposed to be the powerhouse team is the doofiest shirt, because when I'm shopping on the internet, I'm only half paying attention. I'm just making sure they have 2XL, because they were either out of a lot of sizes or they just don't make the merchandise in those sizes, which is the more likely scenario. So I got the stupidest shirt possible.
And you know what? You got to do what you got to do. I'm sure it'll blend right in with all those TikTok Renegade dances. So I'm sure you're not the only one out there that's like, what in the world is this?
Right. I might be the only one that's not on TikTok, though. But maybe, soon, maybe none of you will be on TikTok, because, as I've been saying for years, I don't use Chinese spyware. I just use plain old American spyware. So
big difference.
Yeah, sure. I'm a patriot through and through. So there's also an interesting partnership I learned about, that there's a partnership with the Black High School Coaches Association. That's probably not the right name for it, but at every game there's going to be local coaches from high schools that are predominantly Black high schools, or I don't know if they're historically, yeah, I don't know if they're private schools or public schools, but I imagine that it's probably more public than private. But I think that's sort of cool that they'll be at the sidelines, and I don't know how much input, if any, they'll have in coaching decisions, but they'll be at a professional game and be around professional coaches and professional players at every single game.
And I think that's huge. I mean, a lot of these teams have multiple coaches doubling as different position coaches. You have offensive coordinators who are quarterbacks coaches and receivers coaches. So to give them a little bit of extra support and to give these people some opportunity, I mean, that's something that, more people in America need to be provided with those opportunities, and more of the successful people should be providing, those opportunities to the communities. And when you're talking about football is a community-based sport. And so looking at the league, again, talk about long-term sustainability and success. I mean, they need to have these relationships with the community, and they need to hit back home with their teams. Otherwise, the fans are not going to support them. So I think that's a great idea, and it's going to give a number of opportunities to a number of people. And we got to find some diamonds somehow. So let's go find diamonds everywhere we can.
Yeah, and I think it's just also a cool gesture. I think it's a cool opportunity, and it's goodwill in every single community. So that's great for young sports fans, and who can be a bigger salesperson for your team other than football players and through their football coaches. But speaking of long-term success, when you're The Rock, you're cooking some things, and sometimes you can smell them, and sometimes other people enjoy the scent. And one of those people is Michael Strahan. So the XFL has a partner. I'm sorry, the UFL has a partnership with Michael Strahan's life wellness brand. I don't know exactly what you would call it. Wellness brand. So anyway, it's Michael Strahan. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm not sure how you got to watch this show, but Michael Strahan is a legendary defensive end from the New York Giants.
Oh, he's not that guy from the morning talk show?
He's that guy too. He's indeed that guy. Yeah, he's parlayed that into a lot. He actually broke Reggie White's single season sack record once on a sort of controversial sack where Brett Favre sort of lay down and let him have it. But that was a long time ago. Anyway, Michael Strahan, managed to parlay, not managed, but has parlayed an NFL career into a, mainstream everything career. And he's got a brand, and, partnering with the UFL. And I think that's a great thing. This next tidbit is a little bit more potential, but it's potential as to what could happen for this league if it's successful. The Arena League is now going to be airing on the NFL Network, and that, while that's not directly related to the UFL, I mean, I think it's sort of obvious to see what potential that is. If the NFL Network is opening up its airwaves, they need content. They want content. They want content that's not competing with their games. There's only so many reruns of Super Bowls and playoff games that they can run, and talk shows in the offseason. So, that could be a landing spot for the UFL as well. You always want to have the NFL as a partner. You actually have more information on a lot of UFL and XFL and USFL players and some of the other leagues where they have, there's a pretty good success rate of players matriculating to the NFL. And that, that's one of the melancholy things of leagues like this, is that's the goal. That's a sign of success, but you do see some of your top players leaving.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if anybody knows that's watching. I don't know who's watching, so let us know. But I'm a big MMA guy. I do work for a regional level promotion, and I liken that to UFC Fight Pass. The UFC has made partnerships with many of the regional promotions. They broadcast them on their network, and that's just a good way, not just to get content, not just to give exposure to the regional promotions, but it helps let them identify talent and see what athletes really identify with the people. And so that's the easiest way for them to, I'm sure it's not cheap, but for them to get some boots on the ground and get some eyes in the sky. And so I think that's huge for the expansion of football. I mean, we've seen a multitude of failures when it comes to football expanding, whether it's the Spring League with NFL Europe, the first edition of the XFL. I mean, we can go on and on and on. So to keep the Arena Football League around and provide them with a platform, that's massive. And I mean, we're here to talk about the UFL and today the XFL, but I think we want to see success in the football community, success for football in one league, success for football in all leagues.
I agree. I mean, I think the more leagues people get acquainted with, the better chance there is of them all succeeding. I think that a rising tide probably will lift all ships. We're just not used to it. Most people don't watch the NBA, but people are starting to watch the summer leagues, and people are starting to watch the WNBA, and people, have learned through various things that there's leagues in Europe and Turkey and Israel, and even Russia has a league. And I think, and people are always looking for content and sports content. So, the timing is right. There's about 4,000 different channels and platforms out there. So, again, they hope the timing is right. We hope the timing is right. A little bit of bad news. Some personal news for me is that Boogie Roberts, one of my favorite names, was cut this week. And maybe even sadder, my actual favorite name, Isaac Darkangelo, was also cut. And to make matters worse for the Garden of Doomster here, a player named Hercules was also cut. And had a Samoan last name. It escapes me at the moment, but I, like Paul Heyman, acknowledge my tribal chief and The Rock, his cousin, though there's probably a betrayal coming. It's not a spoiler. It's a prediction. I'm very sad. I mean, 3 of my favorite names, Boogie, Isaac Darkangelo, and Hercules, cut. I'm sure that, there's other names that I love that were cut too. And who knows, maybe some of those players will make it onto other teams. Now that's not to be unserious. It's serious, especially for them and their families and their hopes. But they still have a chance of playing. Abram Smith, who was the number 1 XFL draft pick at running back and sort of looked at to be maybe the best running back in the league or among the best running backs in the league, tore his ACL and is on IR, and that's probably means the season. I'm not sure what their IR rules are. I don't know if it's like the NFL that, but I think that probably means done for the season.
Yeah, and I think their IR rules are still a little bit unclear. I've heard 3 weeks, I've heard 5 weeks, I've heard certain people can come back. So that's something that I am looking for a little clarity on. But I mean, he's a stud, and so losing him is rough, and it's a big loss. So that's a little bit of talent that we're missing on. But I want to go back to what you were talking about, Boogie and Arcangelo and all those guys. There is more opportunity, and it's unfortunate that there's only 50-man rosters in this league. It's unfortunate that only 8 teams started to begin with this, but we're hearing some reports that in 2025, they're planning to expand to 12 teams. And then in 2026, they're planning to expand to 16 teams. So for these guys that are down, they're not out. I mean, there's still opportunity. It might not come this year, but in the future, as long as this league succeeds, I mean, there's going to be teams. And I'm hearing that there's some big name cities that are looking at getting teams. I heard Seattle. I heard Canton, Ohio. I heard New York-New Jersey. I heard Orlando with the stadium repairs that they're having here and upgrades, that Orlando might be getting a team back as they had an XFL team last year. So I think there's plenty of opportunity to go around. I think that there's a lot of potential in this league. And I think it might have been half a joke with their names, but there's going to be a lot more cool names coming in down the pipeline.
Okay. Well, that's good news for me as I look at things that are really unimportant, but at least hopefully a little bit entertaining. And it gives you a little insight, Yeah, with a podcast, even a visual one, you sort of have to show a little bit of your personality, and, people have to either get with it or go, oh, there he goes again. So, it's one of those things. So I don't know where you want to start with the XFL division. There's only 4 teams. You can pick the team that we start with, and then, we can do a little bit of a deeper dive out, if you want to start with the coaches, if you want to start with some of the notable cuts. But I do have a question for you before we get started. And It's very early. It's not even NFL training camp yet, but that's right around the corner. You would have the draft next month, and training camps usually start, and sometimes there are really quick cuts. Normally, the NFL teams will maximize how many people they keep on their roster into the summer, but that doesn't mean they don't rotate them in and out. And do you know what the rules are if an NFL team cut somebody and they don't get picked up by another team within whatever allotted time that is, at what point in the UFL season are you no longer permitted to pick up from the outside, or are you always able to pick up from the outside?
Yeah, and that's a great question because honestly, that's something I haven't come across yet in my research, something I haven't even thought to look up. And that's a great question. I would assume that there's some sort of process that they're going to have to file paperwork, and they're going to have to be added to the pool of players. That way, one team doesn't have a leg up on the other by being able to have any early conversations with the player. I'm sure there's a whole lot of levels to this, but that'd be something to be interesting to look into and share with the viewers out there. I thought you were going to take a really different turn with that question, but that's a great question. I think there is a lot to be found out about this league. I think one thing that I've ran into is it's not all that clear. A lot of the times you're hearing from a source who heard from a source when it comes to reports. So I think this is definitely something to look into, and maybe we can help upgrade the UFL website and help them promote some of these things a little bit better to inform the audience.
I like how you're thinking, and it's true. A lot of it is unclear, and it's sort of hard to get answers because there really aren't that many sources. And the UFL website, just for reference, when I was looking for the cuts this week, I just went onto the UFL site and I looked for their spring rosters, and I just refreshed the screen, and it still had 70 players on there. Well, they're down to 58 now, so it's not like updating their own website is their priority. Now they do have an X account. I think it's UFL_PR, and that seems to be more current. But when we were just talking about Abram Smith, this is no secret. Neither Jake or I are trying to hide from you that we're trying to learn from other sources who have been following the UFL longer than we have, or the prior league or leagues. And I've heard one person say IR, out for the year. Another person say IR, I think they can come back after 6 weeks. I don't think anybody knows. And I think the thing is with this merger, there's two sets of rules. I don't know how detailed either the XFL or USFL were with rules. Certainly, I know they have like 100 and something page rule book, so it's probably in there somewhere. And, regrettably, maybe you and I will actually have to read it ourselves, because it doesn't seem like a lot of other people are either, to report it. And, I ask a good question because I didn't want to look into that myself, and I was hoping that you would know the answer. That's sort of my jam, is to ask good questions, but it's mostly because I don't want to look for the answer myself. But we may have to actually do that. And as someone who's a lot of their life involves reading things that are as interesting as rule books, this is sort of esoteric or existential dread, hovering over me.
Well, I was going to say, you're the lawyer. I look at numbers all day, so I might get lost in the letters and be starting confusing, nines and E's, and it might not work out for me. But we can definitely look into it, because there's definitely a lot to learn.
Yeah, it's well played, old man. Yeah, it sort of got me in a checkmate over there. Funny thing is, I prefer numbers too. Now, not like chemistry or deep math. Like, don't ask me about string theory, but regular numbers have to do with sports and things like that. I can do basic math, and that's easier for me to interpolate, which is a word that I'm not sure if it's real. So, all right. Earlier you said that you didn't expect me to go in that turn with the question. What did you expect me to ask?
Well, at first I thought you were going to ask me for my preseason predictions, and then I thought you were going to ask me about my most surprising cut, and you asked neither, so I was really wrong.
Well, definitely going to get into the most surprising cut when we talk about the cuts, which can be at any time, by the way. Let's do preseason picks after we cover both. Well, I guess
I think we should cover both divisions.
Right. Or we can do a preseason pick for the XFL this week and the USFL next week. But there's going to be another round of cuts. So I don't think we should make preseason picks. Well, listen, this is a podcast. We can do whatever we want. We can make preseason picks and make them contingent upon that they're not final. Our final answer is not until before the season actually starts, before game time at March 30th. I believe games start at noon and 3. I don't know if that means that there's an hour or a half hour of pregame show, or if that's when gameplay starts. I have a feeling this is not like the NFL where there's going to be hour-long pregame shows. I think that's going to be sort of your kickoff times. But another thing we'll have to look up and find out.
And I think the league is kind of a little bare bones still. I think they're a little hesitant to maybe go all in with the investment because they don't want to see it fail. So I think that there is going to be some feeling out periods. I think things might change throughout the season as they get some fan engagement, as they see what people actually want to see, because this is new. I mean, they're taking two different leagues that had two separate rule books, and now you're creating two different conferences that are then going to meet for a championship. And so it's very different. It's a new concept. I don't think that they're going to be doing elaborate pregame shows. I think their commentary team is going to be doubling as their pre and post game shows if they choose to have them. But that would definitely be something interesting to see as we proceed. I just don't see it happening. I mean, if they're all practicing out of one facility, I can't see them doing pregame shows.
I'm of mixed mind with this because I understand that you want to wrap people into it right away by seeing the kickoff. However, we as football fans are trained to have a pregame show. We're also trained to have several pregame shows, like, shows all throughout the morning, and that's been heavily influenced by fantasy football. But we know that there are fantasy football leagues here too. So probably on your ESPN 3s and your FS2s, there'll probably be UFL fantasy football leagues. But I think they should have a pregame show. Now, they have to be very careful who they pick. They have to pick interesting personalities who really know their stuff. They've got to pick like people with personalities like Shannon Sharp, it's electrifying. You just can't take their eyes off them no matter what they say, but they need to know their stuff too, like Shannon Sharp does. Now, I don't know if he knows about the UFL, but I'm sure he could. But anyway, just people that get you excited for the games, but also know who the players are, know where they went to school, know their stats. And I know there's producers that talk in their ears, but it's not going to be like the NFL Live where they're going to have like an army of staff in the beginning. Like you said, they want to recoup their investment, but part of their investment is a 5-year plan. And you're talking about that they're already interested in expanding 50%, then another 50%. So, I'm not sure that everyone wants to make money, but I'm not sure that they're planning to necessarily make money. If they get fan interest and get decent viewership and sponsorships and things like that, I think that they would invest a little bit to have the ancillary products like pre and post game shows and fantasy spotlight, even if it's just a half-hour show. I mean, when Fantasy Football Live started on ESPN, it was a half-hour show. Now it's like a full 2 hours. Sometimes I think it's longer.
I mean, and they rerun it and they play it over and over again. But you're right. I mean, there are fantasy leagues. And more than just a fantasy football league, there's going to be daily fantasy sports. You're going to be able to bet on DraftKings and all sorts of betting platforms. You're going to be able to bet the games. There are futures bets on who's going to win the championship already out there. One of my favorite teams, I mean, I don't really have a favorite team yet, but my favorite team, if I were to place a futures bet, is plus 1,400. So there are ways to make money and monetize this, even if you're just a fan. So I think having something like that would be very beneficial for the league, for the fans, and probably also for Vegas's pockets.
Yep. Now make sure you're gambling on legal sites, of course, and you're doing things for entertainment purposes only. If anything, you should talk to your own legal and tax advisors, because we have no idea.
And gambling is no good. Call 1-800-GAMBLERS if you have a problem.
That's right. I'm only licensed to practice in Antarctica anyway. So all right. So why don't we start with some of the notable cuts according to Jake?
Yeah, I mean, and I'd like to start maybe a little alphabetically. Let's start with Arlington. And I think when you look at Arlington, and actually before I even get started, you're going to see me looking down at my phone a lot. I'm cheating on this Excel sheet by Nicholas Thorne. He made a great Excel sheet. It has a lot of different resources. It has updated rosters, free agency, trackers of the players. I watched a great video on their podcast, so I'll give them a little shout out. It was called Analyze and Educate. And so that was a great podcast that I was able to watch, freshen me up on some information. And then I found this Excel sheet of his on his Twitter. So I'll actually repost that on my Twitter at Jake Lipp Men, just so that way he knows that it was a great resource. And hopefully some other people can find it as a great resource. But I really found a lot from it. And I think if we're talking about Arlington first, I think let's start with the coaching staff. And I think if we're starting with the coaching staff, we mentioned it briefly, so we'll go quick, but they've got Bob Stoops, Chuck Long, Rick Mueller is their GM. Chuck Long is also their quarterbacks coach and wide receiver coach. They got a running backs coach in Reggie Davis, who's also their tight ends coach. They've got Jonathan Heimball, Matt McMillan as their quality coach, and then Jay Hayes is a defensive coordinator of theirs, with Bill Sheridan as their linebackers coach, Marvin Sanders as their secondary coach, and Matt McMillan also doubling as the offensive quality coach and the defensive quality coach, with Scott Spurrier, of course, leading the pack there. Now, do you want to talk about the cuts, or should I?
No, you're doing a great job.
I appreciate that. Well, while we're getting there, I'm going to actually pull up the UFL media. That way I don't miss anybody. But if we're talking about the Arlington team, they've got a really deep roster. I mean, they're really impressive. I think that obviously they won last year, and I think they're very big contenders. And I think if you look at them, they have probably the best quarterback room in the league. I mean, they've Holden Ahlers, who's a great quarterback, and he's going to be their third string guy. And I think Luis Perez, he's a dominant spring league quarterback, and Lindsey Scott, the number one pick in the draft, he is somebody that's very intriguing to a lot of people. Played at Incarnate Wood in college, and so they're going to be a team that's led based off that big three at quarterback with a great coach in Bob Stoops.
I think it's Incarnate Word. I think it's probably a religious school.
I think you're right.
And I actually saw that there were at least 2 players from that school, which is interesting because, listen, I've not heard of that school before. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, but to have a football program that advanced 2 people into a professional league, so they had to be doing something right. You know, an observation while you're looking down at your notes is that
I'm scrolling here.
all of this seems to be a speed heavy league. I mean, obviously with the cuts, we don't know what it's going to be, but almost all of these teams have more defensive backs than anything else. Now, it's interesting. Some of the teams, they just lift the general positions like defensive back, offensive line. Others of the teams, they listed the difference between cornerback and safety and defensive end, edge, defensive tackle. On offense, they would say center, guard, OT, sometimes, but others just said offensive line. But after defensive backs, it's sort of even between linebackers and wide receivers and offensive line for a lot of teams. But I think, obviously I think a lot of that's for special teams and depth, but some teams had a lot of defensive linemen. So, we're going to see the team's priorities, but it looks like just based on the number of wide receivers and DBs on all the teams across the board, that it's going to be a speed heavy league, maybe hoping to control the front of the lines, but but your big squads, I think are just going to be your D lines and your offensive lines.
Yeah, and I think you're completely right with the fact that it is going to be a speed-based league. There's only 50 players on the roster, so you're going to cut a little bit of those extra linemen that probably won't play. You're going to see teams with only 7 or 8 offensive linemen as opposed to the NFL where they typically carry 9. And you'll see D lines that are a little bit smaller because you're going to see some edge or linebackers playing a little edge rusher. You'll see some safeties playing in the box. And I think we're in for some high-scoring games because we're seeing it. Fast wide receivers, fast running backs. And I think you're going to see a lot of blitzing out of these speed guys on the defensive side, which is going to allow for a lot of big plays on the back end. But I have pulled up here, and I apologize it took me so long, but I have the Arlington, some of their major cuts because I can't remember everything up here. I mean, I have a bad memory to begin with. But when we talk about it, I mean, they came into training camp with 4 different quarterbacks. We already talked about their big 3, but they also had another guy named Drew Plitt. And Drew Plitt, he was a starting quarterback for a couple games last year, so a couple people were surprised to see him getting cut. And I actually expect him to get signed by somebody. There's a couple teams that still have some quarterback questions, so it's always big to mention that quarterback being cut. Moving down the list, though, starting quality running back Morgan Ellison. He's a guy that really, I don't know too much about him in his college days, but he's a guy that when he was healthy last season, he was really, really good. He just struggled with some injuries, and they have some good depth there. And then another big guy on the offensive side, there were 2 wide receivers, actually. First of all, Matt Landers. This guy is fast as can be. And he actually already got picked up by the San Antonio Brahmas. Not many players got cut and signed by other teams. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see a slow pace for these guys that get released to get signed, just due to the sheer nature of there only being 50 spots. So I think we're going to have to wait for injuries to occur to see a lot of these guys that get released to get signed. But Matt Landers is the outlier. I mean, this is a guy already found a new home, as I said. And again, as I said, he's fast. I mean, that guy is fast.
Yeah, I don't mean to cut you off in any way, shape, or form, although I'm about to. It's also because, these teams are sort of merged teams, so it may not be injury at all. It just may be that lines don't work together, or players don't work together, and that they're just like missing cues, and the player's perfectly healthy. They just don't fit within the system, or they don't understand what the way the middle linebacker calls the defenses or whatever, and they just may find that this person they played with the same person at Alabama, and they already know their inclinations and their hand signals. So it could be as simple as that.
And I was going to say that I think you're completely right. I really do think you're going to see a lot of these coaches picking up their guys. And I think that you're going to see teammates of other players getting picked up. I mean, we see it on Coach Stoops' team. He has a lot of Oklahoma boys, and none of them got released. So I really do think that's a very good point. And I think it's unfortunate that a lot of these guys might sit out for the year and they might struggle to find a home. But like we mentioned, I think next year there's going to be a ton of opportunities. So these guys should not they should not stop training. They should not stop practicing, because there is opportunity out there. And one of these guys who probably the biggest surprise cut out of everybody on Arlington's team is Calvin Jackson. And if you don't recognize that name, it's okay. But if you watch Last Chance U, you know exactly who Calvin Jackson is. He was a star, I believe it was season 3 when they were at ICC, Independent Community College. And he's a guy who, in Washington State, he ended up having almost 1,000 yards his senior season, scored a bunch of touchdowns. He spent some time in the NFL, and then he was a very high draft pick in the dispersal draft, if I'm not mistaken. So that was a big cut by them, and a big name guy. He's not the only Last Chance U guy in the league, and I kind of thought some of these bigger name guys would get more opportunity just because of their notoriety. And so that was something that really caught me off guard. I don't know if you have any thoughts specifically on that, though.
No, I think you covered all. I mean, the interesting thing is, like, you think that the people from the big schools, necessarily have the advantage, but that just doesn't always seem to be the case. I mean, Washington State is one of the big schools represented here, but there's people from Delaware Valley and
shout out Nolan Henderson.
Yeah. And there's people from Liberty and other schools that are smaller, and it's not necessarily the big school people who are saying. There's a kicker from Millsap. I don't know what Millsap is.
Paul Millsap?
God, no, that's the name of the school that he came from. It's Tamer Russolino on this very team, the Arlington Renegades, unless he got replaced this week and I missed it. But it's just you'd think that they'd find. I remember going through it. Finally, at one team I got to Notre Dame, and I'm like, I don't think anyone else from Notre Dame was listed. There's like only one player from Notre Dame, but there's a ton from Alabama, a ton from Oklahoma, a lot from West Virginia. There's certain schools that are overrepresented here, and I that's neither a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just wondering if it's from the coaches are familiar with the teams that they played against.
Yeah, and I think also just another thing to mention is that the the USFL, they were based in Birmingham, Alabama last year. And then a lot of these teams are also, especially with the practice facility being in Arlington, Texas, a lot of these teams are a little bit more Midwest centric. And so I think you're going to see a lot of those guys from those Texas schools in Oklahoma. And I think as this league progresses, you'll see more schools being represented as there's more teams and more jobs available. Out of necessity, you'll see more of these schools represented. But I think for right now, it's not a huge shocker.
Did Delonte Hood make the cut, or did he get cut this week from Arlington?
Arlington, I do not see him on my list here. Let me double check and fact check with the depth chart that I'm seeing to make sure that nothing's happened since, though.
Well, shout out to Peru State then for getting him this far. So another school that I didn't never heard of unless it's actually in Peru, in which case then it would make perfect sense.
And he's still on the roster. I'm seeing him wearing number 14 at the cornerback position. And if I'm remembering correctly, he's actually a pretty fast player. I remember him in Madden. I can't say I've really watched him in person, but I do recall him being a pretty fast cornerback in some of those rebuilds I like to do in franchise mode. So Delonte Hood is on the roster, and I think that's a great transition as we begin to talk about the defensive side of the ball. And this is where some of the bigger names came out of this roster. I mean, they cut defensive tackles in Trayvon Cooley and Doug Costin. Both of these guys, A, Doug Costin won the USFL championship last season. Mm-hmm. B, both of these guys have extensive experience in the NFL. Doug Costin even went from the USFL to the NFL and then back to the USFL or to the UFL. But both of these guys, big 300-pound D linemen, NFL experience. They're pushing 30, so I guess we would say they're getting older when we're talking athletic-wise, but big 300-pound D tackles aren't easy to come by, and I think that's really to your point about it being a speed league. Teams are devaluing these bigger, older defensive linemen, and we're going to see that in a couple of these teams' cuts.
Well, you know who's going to have something to say about that? Michael Strahan and his wellness brand.
You know what? Just pop a couple of those bad boys, and you're right back on the field.
That's right. He was an older defensive lineman, and then he seemed to play pretty well. He may have some secrets for the players.
And you know what? He had a great career, and for him, I hope he can share his secrets with the youth. I would love some. As I'm pushing 30 nowadays.
Pushing 30?
Oh, I mean. Depends if we're rounding down or rounding up.
You're not even pushing 25. Anyway, but so Michael Strahan, if you would like to sponsor us, we're open to it. And obviously, both of us could use some wellness because he's pushing 30. Sure.
But I got one last big cut. And honestly, this might be more of a big cut to me. He played for the Philadelphia Stars last year. I'm not sure if he still follows me on Instagram, but at one point in time, BJ Bello did follow me on Instagram, and a linebacker, did get released from Arlington. I do believe that for him, he did have some NFL time, and he was a very successful college player. I think, again, getting closer to 30, I think it's a speed league. I think they're finding ways to trim some of those rosters down, and you're losing some of those guys that are a little bit older because you don't know what you have in some of these younger guys, and you want to give them as much of a chance. And if these guys are on the edge of the roster, you may as well release them now so they can find another opportunity and see what else you got in-house, because these teams still have another 8 cuts to make.
But Vic Beasley, he's still on the team, right?
Yeah, no, I've seen nothing about Vic Beasley going away. I'm actually hoping for him to have a lot of success. I love watching Vic Beasley in the NFL, but I think that moves us into who they actually currently have. And we already mentioned that they have the quarterback group. And for them, I think, they had last season a couple guys like Victor Bolden and they had Drew Plitt on the roster. But I think this is going to be a defensive heavy team with a strong offensive line and quarterback play. And I think they're going to do a lot of what they did last year. They're going to ask Luis Perez to game manage. And if it's not Luis Perez and it's Lindsey Scott, that's because they need a little bit of a boost in their offensive production and big plays. And when you look at their defense, I mean, they've got a lot of guys that I think are extremely good players. I mean, we mentioned Delonte Hood. We mentioned Vic Beasley. They've also got a guy in Donald Payne, who we talked about a little bit last week. He played for the Colts and the Ravens. He led the league in tackles last year. I believe it was about 118 tackles. So They're a very good defense, very strong. Again, they also have Marquette King and Taylor Russolino, who you talked about earlier, who I don't know much about Taylor, but I know Marquette King. He was a very fun punter, and he was very good. So it's going to be good for them to have that special teams backing. But what really impresses me about this team, and I don't know if they're the best team or the team to beat just because they won last year, but I think they're a team that's going to be competitive. But they have one thing that I love, and it's a good offensive line. They've got big, sturdy offensive linemen, starting with Jake Lucina. Great name, Jake. But he's going to be their center. And then they also have some guys like Drew Samia, who's going to be a guard for them. They've got guys like Adrian Ely and Bobby Evans. Both of those guys spent some serious time with AFC North teams. Adrian Ely spent a little bit of time with the Ravens. Bobby Evans spent some time with the Bengals. And so they're going to be built from the inside out. And where they are lacking, They might need a little bit of wide receiver talent. They do have a great running back in Devion Smith, wearing number 2. Gotta love that. But I think they're a good team. And we'll talk about, maybe we'll do a little prediction who we think is going to get out of the XFL conference. But I think this is a team that definitely has a chance to contend to win the XFL conference this season.
Yeah, they're listed as one of the favorites. I don't think they're the favorite as of yet, as of this time, but they are one of the favorites. And Bob Stoops, as we talked about last week, Oklahoma coach, a team that's very used to having team manager quarterbacks who could also every now and then surprise you, but also having sort of wildcat and wishbone type offenses and sort of playing around with offensive packages. So I wouldn't be terribly surprised about that as well. And they have Scott Spurrier there, who, if he's anything like his father, he's a very keen offensive mind. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And of course, Chuck Long, just he's how he's long child doesn't necessarily make him good at this, but he should be. Howie Long has had a great playing career, and he's been on those pregame and postgame shows for I don't know the better part of 25-30 years now. So he's been has a lot of insight as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's a good squad. And they sort of have the advantage of during this camp they're sort of home, which is a little bit more relaxed for them. Everyone else is probably in a hotel, and they're probably, they're at their team barracks or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a huge advantage, having to travel less. I mean, they only have to travel for half their games as opposed to all of their games like everybody else. And I think you're right. I mean, they have a lot of really good coaches, veteran coaches. And some breaking news, the Ravens just lost Kevin Zeitler to the Detroit Lions, not the Michigan Panthers, but that's a big loss for the Ravens. But I really do think that, they have all those family ties in the coaching staff. They have some NFL veterans. They have some USFL veterans. They have some XFL veterans. I think they're a team that's set up for success, and Coach Bob Stoops knows what he's doing. And I really don't have too much else to say about the Arlington Renegades. I would, if we're going to give a little ranking, I would give their roster like an 8 out of 10. They're really good. They have a few little holes to fill, but I do think that they're contenders.
Okay. I'm not sure where to put them. Sounds a little bit high so far. I mean, but I'm not ready to give anyone a 10 out of 10. But I think this quarterback situation, it's almost too good, and that can be trouble for a team. I'm predicting a little bit of discord on the Arlington Renegades, and I think they might underperform. I'm gonna give them a 7 out of 10.
And I can definitely see an underperforming season. I think they have all the potential in the world. It helps that there's only 4 teams in the conference, because all it takes is being one of the top 2 teams to perform adequately. But I do think that quarterback battle is something to follow. I think both the quarterbacks, they bring 2 very different skill sets. I think you're looking at a game manager versus a big-time playmaker. I think you're looking at a guy that runs a little bit more and a guy that throws a little bit more. So I think the battle between Scott and Perez is going to be interesting. Personally, I think Luis Perez is the starter. I really don't see a reason to bench him unless Lindsey Scott's unreal.
Yeah, you hate to say this, but something has to happen for Luis Perez not to be the starter. It's not that he's going to be so outplayed. So, I don't know if it's the best thing for the team or not. I mean, he's won 3 championships in a row. So, it's hard to say
everything wrong. Yeah.
But not exactly in the Patrick Mahomes style.
No, definitely not. I would give him, I would think a comparable might be someone a little bit more like Baker Mayfield, but now we're getting a little off topic here. And I think it's a perfect time to move on to the DC Defenders, maybe.
Okay. Well, see, this is part of where I'm revealing myself. I'm trying to talk myself into the DC Defenders. So yeah, let's go through the DC Defenders.
Well, the best selling point with the DC Defenders is their coaching staff. We mentioned it last week. Definitely check out the video last week. But Reggie Barlow, up-and-coming coach, very high potential guy, playing experience, coaching experience. And truthfully, I'm not going to read you guys the entire coaching staff because that probably took too long last time. But they've got Greg Williams as their defensive coordinator, and they've got a number of coaches that are doubling at multiple positions. So they've got a good coaching staff, though. I love Greg Williams. He's an aggressive defensive mind, and Reggie Barlow is a very respected coach. So when you look at their team, they're going to be led the right way, and that's important. And when you move to their cuts, I mean, I think the best place to start is with Boogie Roberts. I mean, do you want to give a quick eulogy?
I think I already did in the beginning. It's, bad. It's for all the wrong reasons, it's sad, and I guess for the right reasons too.
But you know what, Boogie Roberts, he's a great story. I do think he's going to have another opportunity. He's a guy that he took a year off of football and then last year had a great season. That there's some narratives out there about his motivation and about his personality, but I think you see when he's focused and locked in the football, he's a very good player. And you know, a guy from another school that, I mean, not the biggest name school, San Jose State. So you are seeing some of those guys that are at the smaller schools getting some exposure here. And it's unfortunate to see him go. I mean, I guess we just can't make Boogie jokes anymore.
Well, Boogie, we can make one more. You make me feel like dancing, my friend. So hopefully you get picked up by another team. So
and not out of
I want to put on my Boogie shoes.
But looking at them, I mean, back to the topic at hand, the DC Defenders, they really kept a lot of their defense. I mean, most of their cuts were on offense. They cut a nose tackle in Donovan Jeter as well as Boogie. They cut 2 cornerbacks. But really where their cuts come in, they cut 4 tackles and 4 wide receivers. And so I think when you're looking at that, I don't know if that means that they just are happy with what they have. I don't know if that necessarily means that they're looking for other options, but I do think that that's a catastrophic amount of players when you're cutting that many people.
Well, in fairness, they had 14 offensive linemen on their team at some point. So that was the most obvious place. Whereas most of the teams have, more like 10, and most teams have more wide receivers. They only have, I think, 9 or 10, maybe 11 on their wide receiver chart. Just like everyone else, they have a ton of defensive backs. 3 tight ends, 3 quarterbacks. The prior team we talked about, Arlington, had 4 quarterbacks. Do you think most teams are going to end up carrying 2 quarterbacks?
I would hope so, but I don't think so. I think when you're doing roster gymnastics, it would help so much to only have 2 quarterbacks on your team. It would allow you to have that extra player to put somewhere else, especially since these teams are holding kickers, punters, and long snappers. And special teams is such a small percentage of the plays. So to hold an extra quarterback, I think personally, I mean, as a former backup quarterback myself, backup quarterback is the best position in football. Said better than nobody else, but God, I'm drawing the blank on the guy. But the guy from Blue Mountain State. But best position in all of sports. But I don't think it makes sense to hold them. But I also think coaches are going to be a little bit hesitant to get rid of that security blanket. I think if you go into a game and one guy's already hurt, you want to have 2 capable backups that know exactly what you're running. And I think if for whatever reason, if what happened with the 49ers, where you're playing a quarterback with a messed up UCL, I don't think these teams want to run into that. So I think you are going to carry 3 quarterbacks because despite, and this is very interesting, the league's paying every single player the same amount of money. Every player is getting, I believe it's $5,500 a week. So each player is getting paid the same amount. Quarterback's the most important position on the field. So
now, when does the week start? Does it start from the time they're drafted or just for the season?
Great question. I do believe it's from training camp all the way through the end of the season.
Okay.
Well, but I don't have too much factual basis to go off of that with.
And I would presume, and again, I'm not holding you to it because we've got to look into it, and there's not a lot of solid news out there, that they get paid more if they make it to the playoffs. I mean, there's only a few rounds of the playoffs. I think only 2 weeks, maybe 3.
Yeah, I would assume, and again, I'm not sure. I would assume, though, you get some sort of payment, additional payment if you win, and then you get the base pay just for being there.
So it's the week. The league starts the 30th. It ends the 9th. So it's about 10 weeks of football. So that's $55,000. I mean,
that's a livable wage.
Yeah, well, only for 2.5 months out of the year, and I'm sure that you can do other sponsorships. So, wasn't there a controversy with the Destroyer that he was not able to monetize his YouTube channel or something like that?
Yeah.
Which doesn't make a bit of sense to me why he can't.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that might be something that we should talk about when we get to the Brahmas, but definitely a very interesting story. He was given the option, basically keep his scholarship at UCF, my alma mater, or keep his YouTube channel monetized. And he decided to give up his scholarship, keep his YouTube. He now has 6 million followers, and he's doing a documentary right now with the UFL. So I think it worked out for him. And so I think that's a very interesting story that we will follow, and we should probably talk about when we get to the Brahmas, which is
We can.
his team.
It's just if you were a history major and your specialty was Greek, mythology or whatever, and you had a YouTube channel, Greek mythology, and you had 330,000 subscribers, nobody would tell you to stop doing that.
And it's the same thing as if you're a business student and you have a YouTube on the side. Nobody's going to tell you that you need to get rid of your scholarship because you have YouTube on the side, especially a successful one. And that's one of the things. It's pre-NIL. NIL's a mess in and of itself. But I think that was one of the things where the system did him wrong. And I'm happy that he followed his passions. And it's clearly working out for him because he just beat out a former NFL kicker to keep his spot on the Brahmas.
Well, that is good. There's one other thing. You mentioned the teams are keeping a long snapper, a punter, and a place kicker. We talked about last week how the scoring system doesn't really reward kicking, and we're not even sure if extra points are really a thing. So, what do they need a place kicker for?
Kickoffs and game. I don't imagine many field goals, but I think it's going to be those big game moments, end of the first half, end of the game, where those field goals are really going to be a big factor. And you want a clutch kicker there.
Okay. Do you really need a punter? I mean, can like your third quarterback also be, an average punter? Because the rules on the punting, unless you're really backed up on your own side of the field, I mean, it's pretty much almost every scenario is going to end up on the 25-yard line.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of the times you see in college and even more in high school, guys that are kicking and punting. So I'm a little surprised that teams, again, with the small rosters, aren't getting hybrids. But I guess that just kind of tells you the value of special teams. And, the mainstream fan might not really kind of realize, like, the special teams plays might be where they go get a beer, go make some food. But the special teams plays are what dictates who wins and who loses the game. And I think you're seeing some of that emphasis here, even with the new rule set.
Yeah. I mean, and it also makes sense with teams that are younger, newer, faster, maybe not gelled together, that there might be more mistakes, and you can make up for mistakes or capitalize on mistakes on your special team. So, okay, well, it's a developing story to see, I guess, how coaches handle strategy, because I wouldn't be surprised if we got some of those two-headed players where you have a punter being a kicker, and you have a linebacker, one of your smaller linemen being the long snapper as well, and dual roles. But all right,
or maybe even the backup quarterback. That's how I got my start. Long snapping as the backup. You got to get on the field somehow.
Or that third string quarterback. If you're going to keep three quarterbacks, maybe they should have to learn how to do something else. I mean, not long snapping because you get killed, but punting, place kicking, maybe not. Maybe not such a bad.
It's a long season. Plenty of time to learn some new skills, especially if you're doing this for your living.
And make some new friends.
Hey, why not? But we're talking about the DC Defenders. We just went over their coaching staff. Let's talk about some more of their cuts, as we talked about Boogie. We talked about how they mainly are getting rid of these offensive players. And they cut a couple high-profile wide receivers. The biggest names above them are John Hightower and Isaiah Coulter. I definitely just messed up that name. But both of those guys are NFL experienced dudes. They played at big schools, Rhode Island, not as big, but actually I've seen some Rhode Island guys have some success of late. And John Hightower went to Boise State. The blue field is beautiful. Shout out blue. But I think they also got a tight end in Ben Bresnahan. I'm really messing up these names today, but he's out of Vanderbilt. And so they got rid of a lot of different receivers. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see the dynamic there as we move to their actual roster. But do you have
they
any
still have Jazz Ferguson,
on?
though, and Kiki Kute.
Yeah, and Kiki Kute is probably the biggest signing that they made. He actually, where is he from originally? They got him.
Texas Tech. But he was in the NFL, wasn't he?
Yes. Yeah, he played for the Texans. He was very successful there. He was a great
Yeah.
slot receiver, really solid hands. And I was actually surprised to see the Texans part ways with him. And obviously, we're seeing the Houston Texans having a ton of success now. But I actually think, and we should expect to see Kiki QT as their number one receiver, even though he's predominantly a slot guy. And when you look at the rest of their
huge
room,
on this team. I mean, in this entire league, I think slot receiver might be
oh yeah.
one of the most important positions.
And you know what? When you're looking at a slot receiver, that's going to be more than likely your surest hand receiver. And it's also going to be the guy that's closest to the quarterback. So it's going to be the easiest way to get them an accurate throw. You're not really risking throwing it all the way outside and needing to see all the reads in the secondary. You can just throw a little slant and get it in there behind the linebacker and let the wide receiver go to work. So I think
it's the double forward pass allowance.
Yeah. And honestly, I can't wait to see how that double forward pass impacts the game. I would love to sit at a whiteboard and draw up some plays myself and see what you can create, because I think some guys are going to have a lot of fun with that. And I think most of all, I think this is a team that's going to be able to utilize them because they really do have a lot of talent. And we're talking about receivers, so I'll go through some of the other big names. Vincent Smith, he's a guy that also saw some time in the NFL, and Kelvin Harmon, and you mentioned Jazz Ferguson before. So they've got a lot of guys there. And at quarterback, they've got Jordan Ta'amu, who's probably going to be their starter, but they also got DeAndre Francois, who is a guy at Florida State, a very athletic quarterback. So I could definitely see them. Ta'amu's kind of a little bit bigger. I don't know how much they're going to want to get him out in the middle of the field doing some trickery, but if DeAndre Francois got to play, I think he's the guy that you test out some of those double forward passes with and have some fun.
Well, he is a bigger guy. And he's Samoan, so I'm going to go on my wrestling knowledge of Samoans and guess that maybe if you're going to have a quarterback double as your long snapper, he might be the best bet for it. But I have absolutely no idea because I actually don't.
No, and Ta'amu, he's very good. He spent some time with the Chiefs, so he spent some time with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, of course. So he's definitely a high quality guy to have on the team. And I actually did not bring my charger over here, so give me 1 second before my laptop dies.
All right, we will definitely do that. So as we're talking about Reggie Barlow, one of the young coaches, and comes from the NFL, and exciting offensive background. He played a lot of positions in the NFL on the offensive line, so he brings that to the game. And Greg Williams, the defensive coordinator. I mean, he was a head coach. He was the Bills. He was the defensive coordinator for the Ravens. So a whole lot of that going on. Looks like you're back, so I'm going to stop vamping now.
No, you're all good, and I think you kind of hit it all. He coached all around the league: Baltimore, Cleveland, New York. I mean, he's from the Marvin Lewis chain. I mean, he's a guy that's going to be very interesting for them. And I think when you look at their defense, he has a lot of pieces to play with. And we'll revert back real quick. They have Puka Williams at running back. He's a really fun running back, so that completes a really good offense. Their offensive line, I'll be honest, I don't know too much about their offensive line, but their defense is where their bread and butter is going to be.
Well, they got a lot of them, and that probably is because they don't know about their offensive line either. Now, obviously in the cuts, they probably cut 5 or 6 offensive linemen, but because they just had so many, or they will by the end of this season. But hopefully, though, out of that large group, they'll find some there or from some of the other cuts in free agency.
100%. And I think this is a team that actually you might see do a little bit more movement with their roster. I think that they are very loaded up at some positions, like tight ends. We didn't even mention that. They have Caden Smith, a guy that played with the Jets a little bit, very good tight end. And they're loaded up at like edge rusher as well. So I think they like those positions, and I think you'll see them try and look to strengthen some other spots where they feel a little bit weaker. And those might be the positions that we've been talking about: offensive line, defensive line, wide receiver, where they have so many different players there right now. And they've been making a ton of cuts because I'm not sure if they really know who their guys are just yet.
Well, it's fair enough. I mean, you're all getting to know each other. Reggie Northrup is a name that sounds familiar from Florida State.
Yep.
Where else has he played?
I don't believe he spent a lot of time in the NFL. He bounced around some training camps. I'm actually drawing a blank on who he started with, but he's going to get paired up with a guy in Jordan Evans, who I believe he played at Oklahoma. He played a little bit with the Bengals, and that's going to be a really dynamic duo at the inside linebacker, or maybe we'll just call it off-ball linebacker. I mean, football is really becoming a lot like basketball, where it's positionless. as you mentioned before. Some of these even rosters are forgetting to put positions with the players. But I think when you look at their defense, Northrop is.
I'm thinking that maybe they're doing a little tactically. Like I think the coach on that team is playing games. I don't know why, but I think he's playing games. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but like Bill Belichick always kept everything secret, and maybe they just learned that and they decided if I don't have to reveal it, I'm not revealing it.
Yeah, and you know what? My baseball coach listed me at 6'5", 225 on our team website. So you got to do something to play with the head of your opponent, because I most certainly am not 6'5". I can get up to 225 if I really wanted to, but I'm definitely not 6'5".
I wonder if I can get down to 225.
Maybe Michael Strahan can help you out there.
Oh yeah, again, Michael Strahan, we're available. Just call us, hit him up on Instagram. Me, you can find me everywhere.
I mean, and look at this background. There's so much space around this screen for a sponsor to go.
That's right. Is that a wrestling belt you have behind you, or is that a UFC belt?
It's a championship belt. My little in the fraternity, he said, why get a paddle where that's so boring and impersonal? And he got a custom belt to symbolize our brotherhood.
That's nice. Well, University of Central Florida is pretty well represented, at least pre-cuts in the UFL.
Yes, and it's unfortunate. We actually had a couple of different cuts that we'll talk about, and some guys that, I mean, some of them were before my time, some of them were during my time. UCF is an up-and-coming program. Go Gus Malzahn, the head coach. That's a team and a program to look out for. And there's a lot of players that, if they don't make the NFL, that are currently on there, I would look to see them in the UFL next year and the year after that. And yes, we already mentioned Destroying. He's a UCF alum, kind of, sort of, minus the scholarship.
It's unusual for someone who's a kicker to have such a big profile, but apparently can kick the hell out of the ball.
Yeah, and I mean, again, Brahma's talk, it keeps creeping in here. And I mean, that might just be some foreshadowing on, how the Rocks League and the Rocks logo, how it might be all taking over. But I mean, he went kick for kick with Matt Amendola, who is a tenured NFL player. He played in the USFL last year. Yeah, USFL last year. And he went kick for kick with him, basically for their job. And he made every single kick. If you want to find some inside content, definitely go to Destroying, his channel. I believe they're at 7 episodes of his blog, and some really interesting stuff going, some behind-the-scenes training camp there. But that's a former UCF alum. Go Knights.
Okay, very good.
And that's where someone that knows about UCF would say charge on. But no worries. We're talking about the DC Defenders here. And as you mentioned, Reggie Northrop and Jordan Evans, that's going to be their linebacker pairing when it comes to the off-ball side of things. When it comes to their edge rushing side of things, they also have some studs. Trent Harris and Tim Ward, both of those guys saw some NFL time. Both of them had some success last season, and they're going to wreak havoc on defenses, because they're going to have all the time in the world to get after the quarterback when you have guys like Garyon Conley, a former first-round pick, at corner. They've got guys like Michael Joseph also playing corner, DeAndre Baker, another former first-round pick, at corner. And then at safety, they've got DJ Swearinger, who we talked about him a lot last week, another 6-7-year veteran of the NFL, played a lot of inside-the-box safety. I mean, this is a really fun team. And you know what? They lost Abram Smith. We've already mentioned that. It's a big loss for them. They also lost Sean Byer, who is going to be their number 2 tight end most likely. But I think this team is one that can overcome that, and I think you might have to go out in person and go see some DC Defenders games, because I don't know if I can make the trip all the way to DC, but they're going to be a fun team to watch, and I actually think the way that they're built resembles me of a Baltimore Ravens team.
Yeah, no, I mean, Defenders it's just a coincidence, I suppose, but their defense looks rock solid, and especially with new young teams again blending together, new coaching staffs, everything is new. It's a lot easier for a defense to gel, especially when you're fast and talented, than an offense to gel. And this is a short season. So
absolutely,
the DC Defenders, we're grading them. If we're just using full numbers, I'm giving them a 9.
I was going to say the same thing. I mean, I might have been a little bit generous at first with an 8 on the Arlington. I don't know if I'll get below a 7 with any of these teams. I might just be too kind for that. But I would give them a 9. I think if I was a little hesitant on calling Arlington contenders, I think I'm pretty confident in calling DC true contenders to make it out of this conference. And I think that they're well built. And I think if this league is anything like the NFL, they'll find success.
Yep, that defense wins championships. So yeah,
Always.
okay. So
And
we're
Greg
down
Williams.
to we've got it's true. He wasn't a great head coach, but he's always been a good defensive coach. So we have San Antonio and St. Louis left. We have one of the Spaniard Catholics and one of the French Catholics. So which do you want? Which brand of Catholic do you want?
I think we're doing this all alphabetically, without getting religion involved. I say we just go straight to San Antonio.
Okay, well, if you did want to technically go alphabetically, SAI comes before SAN.
I guess that's a good point. So I guess that means we should be. I'm looking at the ST on your shirt.
Okay, fair enough. We'll go with St. Louis Battlehawks.
St. Louis Battlehawks. Well, let's talk about their coaching staff. That's where we've been starting. A couple big names. Anthony Beck's their head coach. They've got Bruce Gradkowski as their offensive coordinator. They've got his brother Gino Gradkowski as their O-line coach. A couple other big names scattered throughout their coaching staff. And it actually
Chris Claiborne and Leroy Glover, both NFL veterans. Chris Claiborne, I remember he was drafted. He was high. He might have been a first-round pick, I think, of the Panthers.
That sounds right to me.
I think he not broke your knees, but I think he had serious knee injuries back-to-back seasons. That was sort of it for his playing career.
And you know what? Sometimes those guys that get hurt, they end up making the best coaches.
Oh yeah, no, but he was a highly touted. He might have been on Detroit. I'm thinking like powder blue, but anyway, I know he was highly. I think he came from USC. But Leroy Glover, he had a successful NFL career. I think he was with the Raiders. I think he was with the Chargers. I'm sure other places, but I don't know anything about Anthony Beck. I'm just hoping that the GM Dave Bowler is not related to Kyle Bowler, and I hope that the Gradkowski boys get into a fist fight every single week.
Yeah, I like the Gradkowski brothers, but definitely some fun fights would definitely help provide some entertainment for us. And Anthony Beck, I'm forgetting what NFL team he played for, but he was a tight end. He played for, I want to say Arizona, and now I'm looking it up. St. Louis, it seems like, was the best team that he played for. But he's a guy, big tight end, and I kind of remember him a little bit. He was more of those blocking, hard-nosed tight ends. And he's a guy, he actually reminds me of Detroit Lions head coach. And God, I'm drawing blanks on everything right now. What's his name? The Lions coach. He came from New Orleans.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. I can't think of his name either. But yeah, they're Clay Matthews. Is that their coach now?
No, Clay Matthews.
I can't.
That's funny. But
Dan Campbell.
Yes, Dan Campbell, another former tight end, hard-nosed guy. And I personally think that this St. Louis Battlehawks team, they're looked at as a favorite. I think they have a coaching staff that's built to be a favorite. But we're going to get into their roster now. And I'm not as confident with them as I am with DC, to be perfectly honest. I think when you look at their cuts, they cut, as you mentioned, a UCF alum, a tight end in Kenmore Gamble. In addition to that, they had to make a kicker cut. They cut Andrew Mevis from Iowa State. And really, besides that, Prince Charles Awara, he was a guy that had a lot of success last year at cornerback, but a lot of their cuts are not the biggest of names. John Daka, he was a guy that had some success last year in the league out of James Madison. But truth be told, I think that they're a team that they're built a lot on names. And again, this is a new league, a new year. But last year, a lot of the NFL guys struggled. And what they're left with on their roster is a lot of NFL guys and not a lot of guys that are through and through spring league guys with the track record of success. They're led by A.J. McCarron, and they've got Wayne Gallman, who's the Giants running back. And they've got guys like Marcel Aitman at receiver, as well as Hakeem Butler. But after that, you've got Jared Jones-Smith, who bounced around the league. You got a guy in Steven Gonzalez, who's a big guard. I'm struggling to find guys here, though, that get me uber excited. I mean, the guy on their defense that I really love is Ben DeLuca at safety, and they also got Pita Tamo Openu, who was very good last year, but I don't know. Maybe I'm still getting a little bit adjusted to this league, to this style of play, but this is a team that I don't love their roster, and I mean that in the nicest way possible.
Well, I think when you have AJ McCarron to Wayne Gallman, you sort of have the Alabama Clemson thing. Those teams are very familiar with each other. That's a pretty good combination. AJ McCarron is sort of more of a game manager quarterback, but he does have some explosiveness.
He won national championships.
Yes, he did. He's a winner, and he's definitely the big name on this team. They are in the city that sells the most tickets, but that's still between 30 and 35,000 fans, which is a lot, but I don't think it's really enough for a 12th man kind of advantage where you get those stadiums with like 70, 80,000 people all chanting. They're open air stadiums for the most part. I'm with you. This team seems like it's got a bunch of holes. I appreciate that AJ McCarron wanted to come back to them, but I'm not really sure what that means. I mean, why does he love this team in this league so much? I mean, even if he was getting the NFL minimum, it's still probably 6 times more than he's making here. So I don't know if he wants to do better than being a backup on the Bengals, and I don't know if his motivation really matters necessarily, but I'm not seeing the rest of the team as being as fully formed. Like on most of these teams, you can sort of figure who some of the starters are going to be, and you have sort of an idea as to what style of football they're probably going to play. This one, I'm not so sure. And for a team where the head coach is a tight end, I don't know. I mean, this is nothing about the players necessarily, but one of the tight ends is from Bethune and the other is from Moorhead. I mean, not exactly giant schools known for their, pro football pedigree. And they let a guy from UCF go, which is sort of more known. Now, both those two guys might be better than Gamble was, but what's that say about their drafting or their front office? So I don't know. I just would have felt more comfortable if we knew who their slot receiver was, and if you had a tight end that had a little bit more pedigree, because then you have that sort of middle of the field thing going on, and all you need is a couple of fast wide receivers to stretch the field. Whether they're actual threats or not, they still have to be covered. And I think that these teams with these DBs, I mean, their first instinct is to follow the fast receiver.
Yeah, and again, shout out to Nicholas. I mean, this is really good. I mean, again, Nicholas Thorne on Twitter. It's in his pinned tweet in his bio. But when looking at it, I mean, he does have Hakeem Butler listed as their slot receiver, who I personally don't envision that at all. He's 6'5". He's a jump ball threat. I could never see him in a slot. I do see Darius Shepard. He's a guy that could definitely play the slot.
That's a jerry-rigged tight end, isn't it? At 6'5", right?
Yeah, and really, that's probably, if they put him in the slot, that's kind of more the purpose, is to kind of have him be a tight end who's standing up and out wide, and they only have 2 tight ends on the roster.
Right. But a lot of button hooks.
Yeah,
L left, L right, straight,
and just keep it simple. I mean, and then they also have Marcel Aitman, but he's another guy who's 6'4", 6'5". So I mean, you have a lot of big body receivers, and that definitely helps a guy like AJ McCarron, who, like we said, has that pedigree, has had that sustained success. He's won, I believe it was 2 national championships back-to-back years. So he's a guy that. Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that you could consider, probably maybe one of the best quarterbacks in the league, maybe the best quarterback in the league when you're looking at pure accolades. But I personally don't see it. I mean, I do like Jared Jones-Smith. He's a big tackle. I just don't see it. And, looking down the roster, there is one guy I see that I do like, Carson Wells at linebacker. I'm forgetting I think he was North Dakota. He was either North Dakota or Iowa, one of those schools that wears yellow. But Carson Wells. Oh, Colorado. Oh, they don't even wear yellow. Oof.
Yeah, they do. They have yellow stripes. I mean, and
I appreciate the backup there. Yeah. But Carson Wells, he is a guy that he had a little bit of time in the NFL as well. Yeah. A gold. I like the gold. Yeah. Yeah. But I don't know. Their roster is definitely a work in progress. And I'm sitting here scrolling back and forth through this Excel spreadsheet, and I'm trying to convince myself of this team. And I guess really we can't fault their skill positions because they did have Jacour Pearson, who was the number one receiver last year, and he's on injured reserve. So that's a huge loss for them. And more than likely, he was going to probably be their number one go-to target, whether it was in the slot or out wide. But I don't know. I said earlier, I don't know if I'll give a team below a 7. I'll give this team a 6, and that's really on the backs of A.J. McCarron and Wayne Gallman and these big targets that they've got at receiver.
Yeah, I agree. I'm giving a 6 also. I think this team could definitely surprise, but I'm not seeing them being very exciting on the outside, and I think you need to have some excitement on the outside. If you've got all these DBs and you only have single coverage for your wide receivers all the time, that spells trouble.
Yeah, they're just a weird team, and they're one of the betting favorites to win it all.
I know.
Personally, I don't see it. I wouldn't put any money down on there if you're looking to place a futures bet on a team here. But I don't know. I think we could talk in circles about them, and I think we should talk about probably my favorite team in the XFL conference. I've been going back and forth all day because originally the DC Defenders were probably my favorite team. But all day as I was doing more and more research preparing for this, I was like, kind of like the San Antonio Brahmas. So I don't know if you have any thoughts. I mean, that's the Rocks team, but I don't know. I'm intrigued.
Well, I know they picked up a player like today or yesterday. That was like a big ad, like a wide receiver. And they seem to be the most aggressive, but I have to be honest, this team, I'm interested to know what you are seeing in them, because I just see them as being the strangest team of them all. I mean, I don't love their defense. I don't love their offense. I don't love their coaching staff. I mean, I have fondness for offensive lineman Andre Garode. Obviously we not made fun, but the 11th commandment is thou shalt not start a professional football league without having Wade Phillips as a head coach. But that doesn't mean that he's great. It just means he's a steady hand. And I just don't feel this team. I feel this team is the most chaotic, and they had a good addition, but they added a good addition because they needed one, and I feel like it wasn't just to make their core stronger. It's just because their core was already so weak that they needed that one wide receiver. They seem light on the defensive line, heavy on the linebacker. I don't know. I don't get this team. Tell me what you love about them. Anthony McFarland. I mean, that's what we should both. The Maryland guy, he's explosive. He very well might be the best running back. And in the new league where your offenses aren't going to be that complicated necessarily, that could be the difference. But we could easily have said that about McCarron and Wallace as well. I'm not sure. Tom Flacco is one of their quarterbacks who in college mostly play tight end. We both are very familiar with Joe Flacco. I don't get this. Tell me what you're seeing.
Well, I'm definitely wacko for Flacco. Good story is I made cookies for Joe Flacco's wife in trying to get them in my snow shoveling business. I did not shovel their driveway in the end, but
Maybe your cookies stunk.
I hope not. But I hope they didn't make him play bad. But when you're looking at this team, I mean, it starts with Wade Phillips. I mean, we know who Wade Phillips is. Everybody knows who Wade Phillips is if you're a football fan. I mean, that's a hard-nosed defensive football coach, which I love. I mean,
is he still?
Their coaching. You know what? I'm going to go with yes. I'm going to take it to the grave with him. Wade Phillips is a hard-nosed defensive coach. I don't care what era it is.
Okay. I mean, he's north of 75.
Yes, but so is Biden. But
well, I don't want him to be the head coach of my football team either.
I mean, debates. But they've got an interesting coaching staff because their coaching staff's actually lighter than other teams. So I don't know how much I love that. I mean, they've got their special teams coach also being their wide receiver coach, and he's also being this and that. I mean, it's a little interesting. I do agree with you. They are very chaotic, and I like that. And I also like that they're plus 1,400 underdogs. Last year, both in both leagues, big underdogs were the teams that won. I mean, in spring league football, you don't know what's going to happen. You have to expect the unexpected. And that's what I'm looking at with this team. I mean, their quarterback position is really not figured out yet. I mean, they've got Quentin Dormady. They've got Tom Flacco, as you mentioned. Chase Garbers, who I have no idea who he is, to be perfectly honest. No offense to you, Chase. I'd love to get to know you.
He's from Cal, another bowler guy place.
And you know what? Maybe that'll help him out. But what I love about them is, I mean, it really is a Wade Phillips team. They're a hard-nosed football team. Not just at running back do they have Anthony McFarland, but they have John Lovett, who he's a guy who I don't know. I like John Lovett.
John Lovett's the main guy goes, it stinks.
I mean, it's going to stink when he's in the end zone. But
you don't know who John Lovett is. He was on Saturday Night Live and things like that. So,
but this is the football player, John Lovett.
No, this is John Lovett. Entirely different. You older fans out there, you know who John Lovett is.
But with the rest of their team, I mean, they've got some interesting guys. They've got guys like Calvin Turner and Marquez Stevenson at wide receiver. Both guys have had a lot of success. Matt Landers is the guy that you were mentioning who they picked up. We talked about him a little earlier, but he is fast. I mean, he's really fast. So it's going to be fun to see him. And really what I love, and typically I hate when teams do this, when they take wide receivers and put them at tight end, but they've got a former Denver Bronco, Cody Latimer, who they're using as their tight end. And I absolutely love that. I mean, he's a big body guy, and he's not going to be in there to block. He's in there to catch passes. And so I think he really rounds out their skill position talent with a strong running back room and some speed at wide receiver.
Okay. And then, of course, your favorite kicker's on the team. So there's that.
Yeah. I mean, do we want to talk a little bit about Donna De La Haye? We've already talked plenty about destroying.
Yeah, I think we did. I think we covered we blew that lead early, but that's fine. That's right.
We're having fun.
Yeah.
But I think if it's a Wade Phillips team, you want to talk a little bit about their defense?
I think we have to.
I mean, that's what they're built upon.
Yeah. All right. Well, who do you like? Who are your standouts here?
Yeah. I mean, when you look at their edge rushing position, there's one name that sticks out. It's Terrell Basham. Big boy. Gets out the quarterback. He had a little bit of success in the NFL. He hung around a little while, and I think this might be a really good place for him to rejuvenate his career with a coach like Wade Phillips. I think when you look at the rest of their defense, it's their secondary that's really impressive. I mean, they've got guys like Quincy Williams, Darius Phillips, Bo Pete Keys, Corey Mayfield Jr., and that's just their cornerback position. At safety, they've got Tease Tabor. They've got guys up and down this defense. And I don't know. I think that they're just a fun team. They have a lot of cuts to make, especially at linebacker. I think you mentioned that a little earlier. They have a lot of guys at linebacker.
A lot of linebackers.
But I think it makes it easy because they kind of already know who their offense is. I mean, they have their skill position talent. They have their quarterbacks. They have their tight ends. They just have to trim out the fat in the O-line room. And then at this point, you're going to pick who your starting defense is. And when you have a lot of guys that have good experience, not just in the NFL. I mean, we're only really highlighting the NFL guys, but they have a lot of guys here that have experience throughout the leagues. Prince Emili, Delonte Scott. They've got a lot of options, a lot.
They have a couple of Maryland guys, but on the O-line, they have two people. Now, I don't know if they got cut today, but they have two people from Minnesota, Chuck Falaja and Evan Hine. And if you have two O linemen and they're still on the team that played together in college at all, I mean, there's going to be some good communication there. And
I hate to burst your bubble, but they did cut Evan Heim, unfortunately.
Well, then there goes that wonderful point out the window. So obviously those two guys didn't communicate at all.
But they do have two great tackles who I think will communicate, and they still do have your boy Chuck Falaga. But at tackle, they got Derek Kelly and Garrick Islands, who are both pretty solid tackles. And so Greg Island, I believe, was drafted by the Ravens. But besides the point, I think that they're a big, tall team. I think they're going to miss having Jack Cohen and Reed Sanat, who are both quarterbacks from last year, as well as they also last year, now looking down a little further down this list, I didn't even realize, but they had Paxton Lynch and Kurt Benkert as well. Kurt Benkert also has a very successful YouTube channel as well. But another former quarterback that was in the NFL. I do think that this is a team that can surprise. They're not going to be your traditional style team. They're not going to be the biggest names, but they're the Rock's team. And I think there's something to that.
Well, they're all the Rocks teams. So, I mean, they are named after, his thing, but, his the Brahma Bull. I'm not sure. This team, I'm giving it 5 just because I have no idea what they're really all about. I think they've got pieces, but in between those pieces, there's a lot of question marks. And I don't know. I think it's a little bit late in the season. And normally, okay, so they have a small coaching staff and a veteran in Wade Phillips. So normally you would think that they know exactly what they're going to do. The message is simple. That's why you don't need a lot of coaches. They're all on the same page. And that combination with sort of a chaotic roster, it doesn't make sense to my linear brain. So it could either be feast or famine. I don't think it's anything in between. Like, I don't think this is a team that goes 4-4 or 500. I mean, this is a team that either they surprise everyone and they win like 75% of their games, or they win like one game.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're completely correct. I mean, football comes down to the quarterback. Your offense can only do so much without someone that's going to control it. And your defense, it does win championships, but points need to get put on the board somehow. So I'm actually going to take a risk here, and I'm going to give them an 8. I think that they're right up there with DC defenders. I think that they're a little bit unknown, but I think that's going to put a chip on their shoulder. And I'm buying into the Wade Phillips Kool-Aid. Give me Wade Phillips. Give me whatever's cooking up in his nonlinear brain, and let's see what they've got. I mean, there's got to be something for them being in Texas. They're not having to travel so terribly far. There's got to be something to be said for having Coach Phillips. And I don't know. I like their style. I like the fact that they have destroying. There's going to be a lot of eyes on them. And maybe it's because I'm watching the Wrexham documentary right now. And, you see teams that have eyes on them kind of have those storybooks endings, but I can kind of see them having a storybook ending. And if I would give a really early prediction, I think that Arlington does not make it to the conference championship game this year. I think DC versus San Antonio is what you're looking at.
Wow. I'm going with DC, and I do think I am going to go with St. Louis and DC, but DC makes it out of the game. Again, there's still another round of cuts, and there's a lot of free agency, and there's things that are going to be happening. But play does start in 12 days from the day that we are live, and depending on when I get around to uploading this as the podcast, it'll be around. Might be 12 days, it might be 10 days, but you get the point. Gameplay is starting quickly, and they're doing scrimmages and things like that. And, we'll see about getting this. Hopefully the UFL is better about updating their webpage. I'm going to become more diligent about checking that one X account, because I'm still not used to saying X instead of Twitter, because I didn't know about it until this week. And I was going on the presumption that they'd have, their social media, that their webpage would be the first thing that they'd be updating, and everything would flow from that. But nope. Their social media team seems to be more current than their home office web team. And maybe that's just because a lot of people wear a lot of different hats, and they're sort of trying to reduce spine and coordinate what teams are practicing when, and whatever other, items that they're trying to do. When you have a smaller league, probably have people who wear more than one hat. So we'll see. This is a learning podcast, just like, this is a learning league for most of the fans, and whoever the experts are or were, I doubt that they're really experts here too, because this is a new league. There's new rules. We don't know how the teams are going to gel together. And it's funny because I think yesterday or early in the day, you said, yeah, I think it's going to be a shorter show, about a half hour. And we've gone just over 90 minutes. So I think that's probably a great place to stop it. So, Jake, unless you have some final thoughts, and if you do, let the folks know. Otherwise, let them know where, or let them know if you want to be followed and found, how they can follow and find you.
Yeah, I mean, follow me on Twitter, X, whatever it's called these days, at Jake Lipp Men, Lippman. As you know, in the podcast, it's just not men, it's man. When we're talking about what to look for, let me know, because I actually am trying to put a lot more UFL stuff on my feed. So if anybody's watching and has some good pages with some good information and stuff, let me know. I'm going to start posting a little bit more UFL stuff. I also got my MMA stuff going on. I'm trying to bring my channel back behind the cage door a little bit. So we're going to work on some content there and other UFL related stuff, hopefully, as well in the future. But this show is a Monday night show. Typically, we're going to do these Sunday nights. Thank you for working with me. Yesterday was a little chaotic and unplanned for, but Sundays at 4 p.m. is where we're going to be. So tune in next week. You can always have the option to watch these back afterwards, but appreciate everybody for watching, and let us know what you want to see in the future.
Yeah, watch them often. Yeah, absolutely. And, next week will be at 4 o'clock on Sunday. We think our regular time. But then when the games start, we've got to figure out when the games are going to end. So probably we'll be doing Sunday nights a little bit later because we don't want to be competing with the UFL games. Plus, we want to capture and absorb everything. So, but we also want to probably eat dinner. So we'll probably figure it out. So that's very much a negotiation. Pasha dinner. So we'll probably figure out what time games are likely to end, and then we'll have a different season schedule as well, and we'll keep you abreast on that. And probably the best ways to find it is, Jake just gave you his social media. You can find me on X at IcarusFellMD. You can also find me on Facebook. And obviously, if you've been listening on the download, you're either listening on Garden of Doom feed or the Hammerlock Hangover feed. So you already know about those things. And if you're watching on Unpopular Review Sports. So you already know about that. You can also find me on Unpopular Review Wrestling, and you can subscribe to that as well. And Unpopular Review Entertainment, which I might be on the X-Men 97 review show. I'm not sure, but every now and then I pop up there anyhow. And, just give us a subscribe. Unpopular Review, we could use it. And also Orlando based, although I'm not, but they're Orlando based. So, a lot of Orlando, hearts and minds going on here about that. So, without any further ado, thank you all for watching and listening. And again, if you like it, give us a rating or a review, and share with your friends in your 6 degrees of separation. We're getting on the UFL train, and hopefully you'll join that train too. Imagine how cool you'll be in like 25 years when it's an established league and you're like, I watched it from day one.
I mean, this might be day 10 if you think about the previous leagues. But yes, we're in at the ground floor. Join us with us on this journey.
It's like a Ponzi scheme, and you actually met Ponzi.
Ponzi's going to be my best friend.
All right. That sounds like that's an excellent life goal. For everyone out there, stay able, my friends.